It's Dave. Welcome to Classic Basslines. In this video, I'm going to show you 7 things you can do to get a bass sound like Andy Rourke of the Smiths. I'll talk about every aspect of my signal chain here, from instrument, pickups, strings, plugins, and also show you a few technique things that you can do to get closer to his sound without spending any money. So let's start with the technique side of things. Number 1 tip to get a sound more like Andy Rourke: play with a pick. Andy used a pick on most songs, and that's definitely where to start. The pick gives you a strong, bright attack and brings out a lot of the harmonics that you just can't get with your fingers. I have a few different picks lying around that I like to use for different sounds. I use like a Fender Heavy when I'm looking for like a funky flat wound sound. But for the Andy Rourke sound, I want a really stiff pick that doesn't have any give in it. I'm playing the Vegan, I think this is the 1.2 millimeter. And I really like it. It's easy to grip, has a nice strong attack on it. Now the second tip really ties in with the first tip, and that's to play closer to the bridge. When you play closer to the bridge, you get a lot more of the harmonics and you get a brighter, more attacky sound. Jaco Pastorius was a huge proponent of playing close to the bridge, but of course he did that on a jazz bass. And on a jazz bass, there's a pickup right here where you can rest your thumb, and that really lets you dig into the strings in a certain way. On a precision bass, there's no pickup here, and playing fingerstyle is a little bit limited over there, but you can still hit that area hard with a pick. Check out these pictures of Andy Rourke. You can see that he played in between the pickup and the bridge about right here all the time. Notice the wear on his bass where he anchored his pinky. You can see all the finish is gone, and he's even dug out some of the wood. Now all that leads me to tip number 3, which is play a P bass. Andy almost always played a P bass. What kind you play isn't terribly important. Here's a picture of Andy playing a Squire. I've got here my trusty Takai hard puncher, which is a Japanese bass from the 80s. A P bass is really just defined by having this split coil pickup in that position right there. Now, tip number 4, have a good pickup. There are a ton of options these days. These old Japanese basses, they were well made and had good wood, good components, but the electronics were a little weak. So I've actually replaced this pickup. This right here is the David Allen CS 1088, I believe. I put it in this bass because I was looking to have a bass where I could have a nice, bright, round wound P bass tone, inspired by both Andy Rourke from the Smiths and by Bruce Thomas from Elvis Costello and the Attractions. This pickup has a nice clear sound and a good grind to it. That's what I like about it. Tip number 5, you're going to want to use round wound steel strings. These are the Rotosound medium light. That's the 35 to 90. That's a pretty thin gauge, and I'll talk about why I'm using that in the next tip. Any stainless steel round wound should get you in the ballpark, but the Rotosounds are cheap and widely available. Tip number 6. Now this is a huge one, and this is sort of the reason why I made this video. You're going to want to tune the bass up to F sharp. What that means, you have F sharp, B, E, A. Both Andy Rourke and Johnny Marr were often tuned up a whole step. That's the reason why I'm using these light gauge strings. I'm afraid that if you tuned up standard gauge strings a whole step, it would put a ton of pressure on the neck, could bow the neck, could cause problems. So I went to those medium light gauges. I've read that Andy Rourke used the medium, the 40 to 95. On my bass, these 35 to 90s feel pretty comfortable, and I didn't have to change the truss rod after I put them on, which was nice. I am tempted about going up 1 gauge and seeing how they feel. I saw an interview where Andy claimed that playing the bass felt like playing cheese wire, so I assume the strings were pretty high tension under his fingers. Tuning up to F sharp helps you get the Andy Rourke sound for 2 different reasons. 1, the tighter, higher tuned string cuts through the mix in a certain way that you can't get from down-tuned strings. In the classical world, double bass soloists will use what are called solo tuning strings, which is the same thing, strings that are meant to be tuned F sharp, B, E, A. And they'll use those for something like a concerto or for playing a Bach piece, and it helps it cut above an orchestra. In this case, this is helping Andy Rourke cut through the jangle of Johnny Marr's guitar. The other really cool thing about having your bass tuned up a step is it gives you the same open strings that Andy Rourke had, which makes you able to play the bass lines in the same position on the bass. There's that part of This Charming Man at the end of the chorus where he actually goes, and the strings are ringing out together. And, you know, if you just play it on the other bass, you can't quite get that thing. So it's just kind of cool. Last tip, I'm going to show you the plugins I'm using. I'm using an SVT plugin from Universal Audio, and you can see my settings here. I'm also using in GarageBand the Retro Chorus, which is modeling the Boss CE2 pedal that I think Andy used. I'd like to have just a little bit of chorus in there. I also have a little bit of compression on it. You can see here I'm using the Universal Audio LA2A. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this helps you get closer to sounding like Andy Rourke. Like and subscribe if you want to see more like this. Thanks.